I'm Dr. Scott Callisted, and this is a saxophone masterclass, part of the Summer Masterclass series for Canon Music Camp for July 2021's camp. We're going to talk about quite a few things related to saxophone, and we'll talk about the goals in a moment. But first, a little bit of information on the camp from our next slide here. There we go. Canon Camp has been in existence for about 52 years now, one of the longest running camps in the nation, and a 3-week camp up in the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina. You can look all over the web and find lots of information about Canon, but it's fantastic. What we'll try to talk about today, now where'd we go? There we go. Today we're going to talk about, well, in addition to saxophone information, just a brief bit about me. I was raised in North Dakota. I taught band in Minnesota for about 10 years, and then went back to grad school for saxophone performance master's degree, stayed on for a doctorate degree in saxophone performance. Related studies in the master's were jazz performance, related studies in the DMA, the doctoral degree, instrumental conducting, and music education. So fairly well-rounded as far as the educational scope. Been working here at the Hayes School of Music for the last 15 years, having started in 2006. Some of the things I want to talk about today, tips on daily practice routines, what to practice, how to make practice more effective. Looking over your instrument and making sure that it's going to work okay, maintenance and things you ought to do, maybe things you shouldn't do. And then actually working up the audition music. I'm going to listen to recordings of the 9, 10, and 11, 12 county, district, all-state music pieces. There's one for each. And then talking through some specifics on each of those pieces, specifics as far as what to do with certain fingerings, or how to deal with ornamentations like trills and grace notes and others. Maybe some expression points, when to add dynamics, things like that, how to work up the really hard stuff. So that's how we'll wrap this up with that. Anyway, let's look into it a little bit. First of all, practicing. Practicing is not usually everybody's favorite thing. And I think students get frustrated with practicing because quite often we are not taught how to practice. We just kind of launch ourselves into the practice room and just start playing. And we need some level of organization. I'm not saying get totally uptight about writing everything down, but you do want to write some things down. Yet, first of all, decide, why are you going into the practice room? What is your goal for that session? That would be a very short-term goal. And if you want to also look at mid-range goals and some long-range goals, those things will really help you make use of practice time over a longer period of time and achieve the goals that you want to set for yourself. So what kind of goals should you set for, say, a short-term, one-day practice? You're going to go in the practice room for 1 hour, perhaps, or 30 minutes, or an hour and a half. You decide, work with your time schedule. Are you going to work on some long tones to help focus your sound and develop embouchure muscles? That's something you do each day, but probably more of a long-term goal, ultimately. You're going to develop some scales. I want to learn all my major scales and play them really fast, and arpeggios too. Well, that's a large goal, but find a little piece of that bigger goal to do as a short-term goal for the one day. Maybe take one scale, E flat major, and the arpeggio that goes with it. Maybe 1 octave up and down. Find out how carefully, how perfectly you can play it and what tempo allows you to do that. Maybe you're going to play E flat major up and down 1 octave at quarter note equals 60, playing eighth notes. Or playing 16th note, depends on how well you play and how much experience you've had with that scale. Set the metronome, play it perfectly, make sure you're listening close, get it right, and then speed it up gradually. Take your metronome from your starting tempo, move it up 3 points or 5 points, play it again. It should still sound perfect. Do another small increment, play it again, should sound perfect. So that time process would be a good way it would be good for a short-term goal for one-day practice on just the E flat major scale. You want to add some other things for that practice session. You just don't want to play E flat major for an hour. It'll be productive, but you're going to drive yourself crazy. So have some things to warm up with. Maybe a few long tones just to settle your sound in, get the muscles warmed up for the tone control mechanisms. Do some finger work on those scales and arpeggios. Even just trills are really good for the finger. Move on to assignments your teacher might have given you. If there's a piece in band or marching band that's really difficult, you want to set a portion of your time frame for practicing to work on that. Same way you did that E flat scale. Get it slow and perfect, speed it up. Find something that you like to play. And I'm a big proponent of dessert. I think having something fun at the end of a practice session, for me, it's doing a little jazz improvisation. I love to put on a play-along track and just blow. I'll play some old tunes that I'm familiar with. But for you, it might be something different. Anyway, add some dessert into the practice session. So set your goals for that one practice session. Now, for a medium time frame, maybe you're looking at, I don't know, a week's worth of practice sessions. That can be a larger goal. For the one session we talked about E flat major. Maybe for a full week, lean on one scale per day and get half of your scales, half of the 12 majors done. Or maybe it's a 2-week goal and you try to get all of them in. So, or a month-long goal or a 6-week or 2-month goal, that's the idea. Start thinking a little bigger. What can I accomplish? And then break those goals down into one-day practice session goals. I know it sounds like a lot of thinking and planning. You can do this with a piece of note paper you just keep in your horn case or with your music in the folder, but it is helpful. It is effective. So try to keep track of where you're at and if you're getting better or not. It does work. Long-term goals. These are some of the big ones. Things like, I'd like to make All-State next year. And for that, you're going to have to look at the All-State music and think about, when is the audition? Where is the quality of my playing on the music piece now? And where does it need to be by the audition date? How many months or how many weeks or how many single practice sessions is that? And when do I want that done with? So you look at your calendar and you pick a target date to be able to play it perfectly, and you work back from there and divide it up. So you can set your mid and small, short-term and mid-range goals based on the larger goal. So the larger goal might be making All-State, or a larger goal might be really developing a beautiful tone quality. So a little bit of time spent with long tones and all your short-term goals is going to add up to a long-term goal on tone quality. So these are things you can kind of plan out. If we simply take out the instrument, go in the practice room, and just play without these goals, we have no idea if we're getting better. You probably are, but it's not going to happen as quickly. And you may not be keeping track how much better and thinking to yourself, wow, that practice session was really effective. I'm going to write down the things I did and try to duplicate that for the next few sessions. Make things better. So now, with regard to these goals, keep it reasonable. Don't choose a goal that's simply not likely to happen. Think about what can happen in a single practice session, add up a number of those sessions for a mid-range goal, and a number of mid-range goals or steps to a larger goal. But ultimately, you can probably do anything you want as far as setting goals and achieving them. You just have to have a reasonable time frame and a reasonable approach, what's possible in each single practice session. And take little bits and pieces. So spread things out and give yourself time to get things done well. Part of this, as I've said, is write it down. Keep a notebook. If you're working on scales, jot down the tempo of that E flat major scale the first day you worked on it. What was the best tempo you played it at that day? But it's got to be played perfectly. So write that down. When you come back to E flat, Write down how many more metronome points you've added on to that. And pretty soon you're going to start seeing that all your scales are getting a little faster. Or the really difficult passage in a piece you're working on, like the Allstate piece, it might go super slow. Write down the tempo at which you played it well. And then as you practice it, keep updating your tempo, your progress. That to me is a really good motivator when I can recognize that I have gotten better at this. I practiced it 6 days in a row, and now I'm 30 points faster than I was when I started. That's encouraging to me when it comes time to take out my horn on that seventh, eighth, and ninth day and just to keep going at it. I see progress, and it helps motivate me. And as I said before, put some dessert at the end of your practice session, reward yourself. All right, let's look at the next screen. So set up a practice schedule that really works well for you. I remember back as a student in junior high and high school, my mom saying things like, "Don't you need to practice your saxophone? Why don't you go practice?" And me thinking, but I got other stuff I want to do right now, or I sort of got to get this history thing done. But setting up a steady time, building that into your daily calendar or weekly calendar, build it in just like you build in time for other things that you do. And it doesn't have to be a lot. There's a wonderful jazz performer named Phil Woods, was around for decades, is a great player. Somebody asked him, "Mr. Woods, what would you do if you only had 30 minutes a day to practice?" He said, "Man, I would play long tones for 15 minutes in the morning. And then later in the evening, I'd get my horn out and I'd play 15 more minutes of long tones." That was his priority, and he had an incredible sound. He had already developed a lot of great technique and jazz style, but to him the most important point at that time was his tone. And so he built that into his schedule. He made sure that was always there. If he had more than 30 minutes, then he'd work on other things. So for him, that was important. All right, so figure out how many minutes you can play. Find a place where nobody's going to bother you while you're doing this. And just a bit of advice, while cell phones are wonderful things, we can use them for a lot of different things. Using a cell phone for a metronome or a tuner is a great idea until somebody texts you and you get distracted. So if you can find a way to cancel out those notifications that will pull you out of practicing mode and into texting or calling or doing something else. I kind of old-fashioned. I've got an old tuner and an old metronome. I actually like those better because I can completely turn my phone off and I don't have to deal with it. So no interruptions, no distractions. Get a routine. Work with a little bit of tone quality, some long tones and intervals for tuning. Work on your fingers with scales and arpeggios each day. Do a little bit of stylistic playing. If there's an etude that's a slow piece or a fast piece and they have to be played in certain styles, make sure you're looking at those things. And then a variety, as I've said before, do something different or do something fun or interesting to keep it lively. Practicing is a routine, and routine kind of gets us into a rut. So we have to find a way to make that more interesting. So just put little bits and pieces of new things into your practice if you can. And it's not all that hard. Just go to Google and type in saxophone sheet music and hit images. You'll see lots of new things to play. Right there on the screen. All right. I lost my mouse. I lost my screen. Okay. Everything, let me back up, make sure I'm on the right screen now that I'm out of chaos. All right, very good. And we're going to move this guy. Okay, elements of practicing. And this is, whether it's practicing in the summertime or during the school year, it doesn't matter to me. Just get in and play the horn. But how do we learn a piece of music? So we're going to learn a piece of music, like this audition music we're looking at later. Start with the ink. Look at all the information you have. There should be notes and rhythms, articulations, dynamics, and ornamentations like trills and grace notes. And even before that, you've got a meter signature, a time signature, and you've got a key signature. And then there might be some words above, like slowly or smoothly or legato or cantabile or allegro or vif. So there's information from the composer, but we start with the ink. And think about the ink as a written language that's trying to translate what the composer has in his or her brain, the concept of the music that he or she may have played on a saxophone or on a piano, but or some other instrument, but this is the heart and soul of that music was in their concept of it and probably didn't get all the way translated into the ink. So we have to start with the ink and do exactly what they say, because that was their best effort at letting you know what they had in mind. So we start with the ink, and you look at all your meters and keys and style indications, and then the notes and the rhythms and all that other stuff. It's a lot. Sometimes it's kind of overwhelming to try to play everything perfectly the first time through. So I always slow it down. I slow it way down. I like to look for the most difficult portion or passage in a brand new piece of music, and try to figure out how that goes and figure out how slowly I need to go in order to play that portion correct. And then I take my metronome and find out what is that tempo, and I practice that really hard spot once or twice. And I go back to the beginning and play the whole piece at that tempo, so that I'm getting, I figure if I can play that really hard spot well, then I should be able to play everything else absolutely perfectly the first time through. And that sets in my mind what the music ought to sound like. It really gives me an idea of what it sounds like when it's right. So that's what I do. So yeah, look at everything. Choose a tempo that will allow you to play every passage correctly. And no, what did I do? Where are we? Elements. I think I just passed it up. I got to get a different mouse. Okay. Anyway, play through it perfectly with a metronome. And then if that worked out, if that went okay, move the metronome up a few points, just like we did with that E-flat scale. Move it up 5 points, 4 points, 6, 3, 7, somewhere, a small amount, so that when you play it the second time, you can play it perfectly again. In fact, what's going to happen by the time you've played through, and you might just want to do segments of it rather than a whole piece, just take a couple of lines, do them slow, do them perfect, and then if it comes out perfect, speed the metronome up just a few points and do it again. And then do it again. You might go from 50 to 55 to 60 to 65. And what you're going to find out after a few repetitions is that it seems to be getting a little easier. And that's because you're getting more comfortable with it. You're recognizing the notes that are coming up, the rhythms that are coming up, and you're going to be more accurate. Even the really difficult spots are going to get more comfortable with those repetitions. And even though you're getting faster as you play through it each time, it's going to feel easier up to a point. Now there comes a point where finally you're getting fast enough that now the hard parts are getting really challenging again. But that's okay. You've made a lot of progress. Now you come back to it the next day. You might be thinking, I should just pick up where I left off. I should start at the tempo that I last played this at. Nah, go ahead and try it, but I think you'll find that it's going to be kind of disastrous going through even some of the easier things. You don't have to maybe go all the way back to your original slow starting tempo. Move it up a few points, but start slow, keep it perfect, and keep increasing the speed. So day 2, you might add on a few more points, maybe 10, 20 points. Day 3, you start slow, bring it back up, you add on a few more points again. After about 4 or 5 days, and I know that seems like a lot, but after a few days of doing this, you're really going to be comfortable with this music. And even the difficult spots are going to start coming under control. Now, the hard parts, you might have to treat those independently. Leave out the rest of the easy stuff. Dig into those hard parts with that really methodical, slow, deliberate practice get it right. Play it perfect every time. Do not accept mistakes. You don't have to play mistakes. You slow it down. And this leads me to a confession because when I was in high school and early college back in North Dakota in the 70s, I thought, being what I thought of as a pretty fair player, that I could probably play stuff pretty fast. And just kind of, I didn't really have to do this slow practice. But I knew there had to be some sort of a shortcut to learning music because it did take a while to learn stuff. Well, I'd just play it fast and then I'd crash around and make a bunch of mistakes. And it was really hard to learn the music. What I've learned years later, do it slow, do it perfect, get it right every time, and then speed it up gradually. And that's the shortcut I'd been looking for back in the 70s. So it works. And you don't have to make the mistakes I did with regard to how to practice. Just play it right every time. So let's look at the next one here. Now, what we were just talking about was playing exactly what the ink says. But remember, the composer had to use this ineffective, this language, this written language that does not fully contain or translate all of the thoughts about the music they had inside their heads. So their concept of the music. So they give you everything they can in ink. And we do that. That's our starting point. But now, how do we improve upon that ink? For example, the tempo is, they might put metronome equals 72. That's great. And it might also say expressively. Oh, well, then we got to think about, does the tempo, in order to play the music expressively, do we lock that tempo in with a metronome? It's a good way to learn the music. Start with that. But as you figured it out, maybe you want to let it push and pull back a little bit as you're dealing with crescendos and decrescendos. I'm not saying you should be really unsteady with regard to your tempo, but sometimes a little bit of a push helps make the music more interesting, more musical, and a little bit of pullback, especially in cadence points. So things to think about. A little bit of flexibility in a slow piece often works well. But if you're playing a fast piece, more of a march feel or something up tempo, you probably do want a steady tempo there. But it's just something to think about. The staccatos. There are different time periods in music, and we'll talk later about the music of the mid-18th century, which is the 1700s. The style of articulation and staccatos was a little different back then. So we have to think about what would have been appropriate for the time the music was written, and what just makes it sound right. If something is quiet, and whether written in 1750 or 1950 or 2050, if something is quiet and slow and a beautiful piece of music, do we really want staccatos? They're going to be really short and accented and clipped. It might not fit the style of the music. So we have to think about those. Kind of sing the music in your head and get a sense for what fits the character of the music the best. Dynamics. Should we work with huge dynamic contrasts or small gradual changes of dynamics? Something might be marked in the page, like a crescendo line, or maybe just the word crescendo or its abbreviation, cresc, period. So we have that indication. We know we need to get louder, but how much? And if it says from piano to mezzo forte, how much is that? So you have to use your musical judgment to make those kind of decisions. So listening to other people play music and thinking, yeah, I like what that one did. I don't like the way this sounded. That might help inform you when you decide what you want to do. And teachers are a really good source of information with regard to this. So dynamic contrast, there's some variables there that the composer maybe couldn't put on the page. We don't see dynamic markings that say, go from 4 decibels to 9 decibels. I mean, that's just not how this works. Vibrato, saxophone, thank goodness, is an instrument that gets to use vibrato. And there are a lot of opinions about a vibrato. I have my own. Some teachers say vibrato should be very even and strict, and always traveling at a specific tempo, like four vibrations or waves per second. No, not per second, but per at a tempo of 80 beats per minute, 4 waves per beat. Regardless of the tempo your music is at, you might practice a really steady vibrato with the metronome set at 80, or at 76, or 72, or 82. And so some teachers think it ought to be very rigid all the time the same. Other teachers believe it should be more flexible, that as you get louder, you use a faster and a deeper vibrato. As you get softer, the vibrato gets shallower and slower. So you have to, again, listen to some performers and decide, what is it you like? How do you think? And your teacher will have input for you. What do you think your vibrato ought to be like? It's a matter of listening and gaining information and gaining experience. So these are some things that would take us beyond the ink. So when you look at learning a new piece of music, think in terms first of the concrete. What's on the page that the composer put there? I gotta do this. And when that's starting to work, then start the interpretive side of it. What can I bring to this piece of music to improve upon the ink? Okay. Next slide. Let's see where we're going here. This is all kind of gearing towards auditions for next year. Well, care and maintenance of my instrument. Yeah, there we go. A couple of different things: handling, cleaning, storing, and repairs, trips to the shop. First of all, handling your instrument. How do we get there? Very good. So handling the saxophone, all these woodwind instruments are really delicate. Saxophones and clarinets, flutes, oboes, bassoons. So many keys. You got little posts sticking up and rods that connect that post to another post, and key work. And if you grab onto it and try to twist something onto the instrument, like the neck pipe or the mouthpiece, it's possible things can bend. So hold it gently. Be sure you're not crunching any keys when you hold the instrument and try to put it together to assemble it or disassemble it. Just be careful with it. Repairs cost a lot. We already talked about taking it to the shop, but repairs cost a lot. Yeah. The neck cork, if that's really tight, use the cork grease. If it's not tight enough and your mouthpiece is wobbling around on the end, get it replaced. You're going to have leaks. Your pitch is going to change if it slides around when you're playing. Get that fixed. Anyway, handling, most repair people will tell you that unless a student just drops the instrument or slams the case around, a lot of damage happens while it's being put together and taken apart. All right, moving on, maybe. There we go. Cleaning out the instrument is an important part of keeping it maintained. And use a swab. In fact, I've got one right here. I use one of these long string with the weight things, and a long piece of nylon afterwards. Normally what I do, after I take the neck off of the saxophone, I'll drop this in the top where the neck, no, I'll drop this in the bell, feed the line down inside the bell, and then tip the thing upside down, and the line will drop out the top of the body of the instrument down here. Then I pull that, and it feeds up through the instrument. You can go either direction with them, that's not a problem. This is made of silk, and so it compresses thin, and it will not get stuck inside an alto sax or a tenor sax especially. It would be a little tight going through the neck of a soprano sax, a one-piece saxophone. Now, a soprano sax with its own neck, a separate neck, it'll go through that pretty well. Be careful though. This is for the instrument and the neck of the instrument, but this is not for the mouthpiece. Do not try it. First of all, this one, particular one, may not even fit through the mouthpiece. But if you do have one with a weight that goes through the mouthpiece, this nylon cord, you can see it's kind of a textured woven nylon, that will file or scrape or scratch the tip of the mouthpiece on the inside as it comes through. If you're pulling it through the mouthpiece, this is going to file a big trough in the tip of that mouthpiece and just ruin it. So something to watch out for in swabbing. We don't use these for the mouthpiece. For the mouthpiece, what you do is just take it to the kitchen sink with a little warm, not hot, warm, soapy water. Doesn't have to be any harsh cleaners or anything like that. You don't want to damage the surface of the rubber or the plastic. Just a little soap, dish soap, and a little warm water. Scrub it out, rinse it out real well. Now, I don't have anything on here about this, but if you do have some of that whitish buildup, that's kind of a calcium stuff from our saliva on the outside of the mouthpiece or even on the inside, ask mom if she's got some white vinegar. And this vinegar, put the mouthpiece gently into something like a juice glass, pour some vinegar so that it covers up those deposits on the outside of the mouthpiece. Let it soak there for a minute or 2 or 3. It might be that much. You may have to come back and do it again. And then when you take that out, just gently scrub on those white calcium deposits and see if they go away. You might want to use a soft toothbrush, bristle brush, scrub like that. If you use a toothbrush, be real careful if you go inside the mouthpiece, because the hard handle of the toothbrush can scar or scratch up and damage the inside of the mouthpiece. But just nice and easy. Now you can, if you need to, you can use the fabric from your swab. If you just kind of twist up a little corner of it, you can feed that in to the mouthpiece to help scrub the inside. Just feed that through and pull it gently and slowly, both ways like that. But do not, again, don't get that cord inside the mouthpiece. Do not boil. Remember I said use warm but not hot. Don't boil the mouthpiece. If you get a school instrument from your band director and you take it home and your mom looks at that thing and says, it's always the mom's, it was always my mom too, looks at that mouthpiece and sees that white deposit we're talking about, stuff like that, says, oh, that thing's not sanitary, I'm going to clean it for you. You keep an eye on her, because if she tries to boil that thing, she will have to buy the school a new mouthpiece. It will totally warp the facing. It'll never play again. One of my students, when I was junior high band director, brought her school-based clarinet mouthpiece in one day and said, Mr. Galliston, my mom cleaned the mouthpiece and it won't play. She was right. And her mom had to buy the school a brand new Selmer C Star bass clarinet mouthpiece for $120 in 1987. And now they're double that at least. So don't boil them and don't use real harsh chemicals. All right, enough on that one. Let's see what else we have here. Storing. I hate to say it, but I used to see this happen too. When you put your instrument in the case, and you all know this, I would think, but don't put anything in there, even the neck strap. Put it in a separate compartment or in an outside pocket or in your backpack. Just don't forget to bring it back the next day. But don't lay the neck strap or any books or anything else on top of the instrument and then close the case. I've seen it so many times. It just, don't do it. They will bend. Something bad's going to happen. All right, enough on that. Repair shop. Oh, here's the repair shop discussion. So every year, even if your instrument seems to be playing just fine, schedule a repair tech visit. Take it to the store. And what I advise, and some of these guys get, especially the good ones, some of these guys get really, really busy. So if you bring it unannounced and say, here's my instrument, can you work on this, please? They'll put it in line as to they've got other instruments to fix, and then they'll get to yours. And it could, I know a guy up here in the mountains who usually has a 2 to 3 month backlog of instruments he's working on. He's really good, but it just takes time, and he gets so much business. It takes a lot of time. So call in advance and say, I want to have my instrument looked at. When should I bring it by? And then when you come in, he can take a look at it and say, oh, this is going to take a couple of days. I'm going to have to put this on my calendar. And you can say, well, can I keep it until you're ready to work on it? And you'll say, yeah, sure. Let's put it on for August 1st and 2nd, and then bring it in to me on July 31st, and we'll get going. Something like that, so that it just doesn't sit there for weeks and weeks waiting for a great repair person to get around to it. And if it's an emergency and you've got to have it the next day for performance or something, let them know, and probably a couple of days in advance would be good. But let them know, and maybe they can squeeze it in and push something else around. But talk to these people. Don't just show up and hand it to them and walk away. Talk to them about scheduling. And what I recommend is called a check and adjust. Unless you know of something specific that's wrong with it that really needs fixing, they'll find that, of course. They'll play it and test it and put the light inside and find out what's wrong. But a check and adjust is usually a good way to start. And if you do this at least once every year, and the summertime is a good time to get this done, so you don't have days at school or weeks at school when you don't have an instrument. Talk to them, get this figured out. All right. Yeah. Very good. All right. So having your instrument fixed, repaired, working well, that's pretty much critical for doing an audition. So I guess the first thing preparing for an audition in advance ought to be make sure your instrument works, plays better than you do. But we've talked about that. Let's move on. When I have a student, or when I'm working for a recital, but when I have a student who's working up a competition piece for All-State or anything like that, we talk about how to learn the music. We do the slow to fast thing. We get it right. We think about interpretation and all those things we've talked about for learning a piece of music. But for learning a performance, performing is different than practicing. Performing a piece of music with great musicality and confidence is different from sitting in a practice room and learning the notes. So that has to be prepared for. And the biggest issue in performance is anxiety, something we call performance anxiety. So one of the ways to combat that is to really, really know the music well. And the worst part of performance anxiety happens right when you're starting to play, at the beginning of something. That stepping into the room, that's when I get nervous, walking on stage. As soon as I look down at the music and I start playing a couple of notes, I'm fine, But for most of us, I think, the beginning of a piece of music is when we're most nervous. And then as we get our heads inside the music a little bit, we remember the things we practiced, that's when we kind of loosen up and say, oh yeah, I got this. So if you can memorize the first 2 or 3 or even 4 lines of your first thing you have to play, excuse me, just memorize it, just learn it, so that when you begin to play, even if you're really nervous and your breathing's starting to get messed up, it's going to come back to you a lot faster because you know it that well. So that to me is a really good piece of advice that someone shared with me a long time ago, and it's helped me a lot, and it's helped my students a lot. Another thing you can do in the practice room, practice performing. And I said practicing is different than performing, but you can actually practice performing. And one of the things you can do is try to make yourself a little nervous by recording yourself, because you know you're going to be listening to it later. So do audio or video, whatever works for you, but set up as though this is a performance and do a recording and try to make it good. And then sit down and listen to it afterward. So that's going to raise your anxiety just a little bit, but it's a good first step. Bring someone else into your practice room, or set up a performance, just a casual thing with a couple of friends, or maybe your teacher, possibly parents. Of course, we all think parents are just going to say, yeah, that sounds great, because they're your parents. Sometimes they actually know what they're talking about too. Anyway, play for other people, because that in itself, even though it's casual or you're just sort of practicing it, they're there to make you nervous, which is what you want practice at. It's hard to practice getting nervous when there's no reason to get nervous. So, and ask for their comments, especially if it's one of your teachers, if you can bring a music teacher. If you're in the band and you don't want to have the band director listen to you that day, maybe the choir director, the orchestra director would be happy to sit down and listen for 10 minutes, give you some comments. You'll get different opinions from different listeners. So there's that. Speaking of different opinions, I give different opinions depending on what I'm listening to or how I'm listening. For example, if I'm listening to a student play a piece of music and I'm watching a copy of the music, I will be thinking more in terms of accuracy and ink. Did they do all of these things correctly? If I don't have the music, I'll probably be listening more to tone quality and expression and vibrato and all those musical elements that we bring to it to improve the ink. So if you have your teacher listen to you play, you might want to play it for them once without letting them have the music, and then give them an extra copy and play it again. And, or do it in the opposite direction. Either way, it's going to work fine. But have them listen twice, once with a piece of music in front of them and once without. So, final thing to do before you go get ready to audition day. We're talking about maintenance. Make sure that instrument's working. And 4 great reeds. You got to have great reeds. I don't want to go into a concert or a recital with a really great reed and 3 backups that are okay or mediocre. Now, I have done this, and this is break my reed on my shirt or jacket right before a performance. Even during a performance once, I scuffed it up pretty good, just not paying attention. You got to have another reed in your reed case that is just as good as the one you're playing on, so that you can just say, excuse me, folks, I need to change this reed. Take that off, put the other one on, and know that it's going to play great. It'll still take you a few seconds, a couple of notes, to remember exactly how that new reed works, but at least you know it's going to work. So 4 great reeds, not 3, not 1 great one and 3 pretty good. That's not good enough. All right, moving on. The day of the audition. This first one sounds like a no-brainer. Make sure you've got everything you need. I don't know how many times, whether I was band directing or adjudicating, where I had somebody show up and say, I forgot to bring my music, or my reeds are on my desk at home, or I don't have an neck strap. Things like that can happen. So make yourself a checklist during a practice session. Everything you're using in practicing, make sure you've got it with you when you leave the house to go to the audition. Just do it, you know. You don't want to be that student who says, I didn't bring my reeds. The one I have not heard yet is, I didn't bring my instrument. I'm still waiting on that. Hopefully I'll never hear it. Also, think about what makes you nervous and the things that make you comfortable. If it makes you nervous to sit with other students who are all talking about their audition experience, what they did when they win, or what they're afraid is going to happen when they go into play, don't listen to them. Bring a book. Do something else. Change the topic. Hey, how about those Minnesota Vikings, huh? Yeah. Find something to talk about. I mean, you figure out what bothers you that you want to avoid doing on an audition day. Bring some snacks. Something so that you don't kind of get a little hungry and wish you had something. And bring a bottle of water so after you've had a snack, you can rinse out that mouth before you play on your instrument. So just to think about those things and how that day is going to proceed and what would help you be more comfortable. Comfortable shoes are good too. They should look nice, but they should be comfortable. Have some time to warm up. I always need at least 20 minutes to play before I even start feeling that my fingers are getting coordinated and waking up, and the embouchure and all the airstream and mechanisms there are starting to work, and that I'm getting my sense of musicianship going. So build in your warm-up from your long tones and your scales and arpeggios and little snippets of the music you're going to play to get into the style. Work on that. It's good stuff. And breathe. This is a wind instrument, the saxophone, especially these larger ones. Breathe, breathe, breathe. You've got to take in big, beautiful breaths of air. And you're going to play much better. All right. Next slide. Let's see what's going on. Practicing sight reading. You know sight reading is going to be on the audition. So how do you practice for that? Yes, you can. You can practice for sight reading. What you do, you sight read. You sight read a little bit every day. And ask your teacher if he or she has a book that you can borrow. If you're a saxophone player, ask him for an oboe book or a trumpet book or something else that's in treble clef and doesn't go way out of the range. If you get a really advanced flute book, you're going to be looking at a lot, or violin, you're going to look at a lot of legend lines. So stay away from that stuff. But oboe and clarinet's going to go down on the low side. We can't get down there. Oboe and trumpet are real good. Maybe French horn, although that's going to go low too. Just ask for something kind of generic. Read through it. Look, as we did with learning a piece of music, glance through the whole piece. Identify the ink, meter signature, key signature, the style. Is it lento, largo, tempo speeds, and style speeds at the same time? Militaristic, march-like, or lyrical and beautiful. Things like that. You can think about that. Pick a tempo where you'll be able to play the hard part and just sight read the whole thing straight through. Perfect as you can, and even the hard part because you chose a slow tempo. Do the next page, set the metronome slightly faster if it's similar in music. It might be a good idea, next bullet point, it might be really good to record your sight reading. And then you can listen to it yourself or have your teacher review it. I find that students will make, if they're going to make mistakes in sight reading, very often it's the same type of mistake. For some students, it might be a rhythmic issue. They might, anytime they get to a dotted 8th, 16th rhythm, for example, they might miscount that, or tied notes, or long notes followed by a rest. They might just miscount and jump. So see if your teacher can help you identify if you're making any mistakes and if there's a consistency to those types of mistakes. What is it? And then you could really focus on that when you see them come up in a sight reading exercise or audition. All right, getting into these audition pieces for the all-state and all-county, all-district stuff. The first thing, I've got a recording of the grade 9-10 solo that I made a little bit ago. And I've also gone through, as you can see, with measure numbers and comments. So if you've got a copy of that music, I'm not going to put it on the screen here, but I know you can pause this, you can download it. If you've got a copy of the music, these measure numbers and comments I think are pretty important to be aware of. But what we're going to do is I will switch the share over to the recording, share screen. The 9-10 is right here, and we're just going to listen to it. Follow along on a piece of music. That's what I'm going to do. B ending from pickup to 21. So the first grace note, the first comment, measure 2, the grace notes need to be relaxed, not fast, not speedy. There's no little diagonal slashes on those grace notes, so they can be slower grace notes. If they have slashes, then they're going to be quick. But dee da 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 la da 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 dum. So very just nice and gentle in that. In the fast movement, we might have quicker grace notes, but in the slow, keep them slow. The triplets in measure 2 need to be very even. Too often I hear triplet figures that go da 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 da. where people stretch the first two and squeeze the third one. Get some triplet practice in scales, and then play that section to get a feel for it. Same thing in measure 5. The triplets, here you're switching from duplet eighth notes to triplet eighth notes. Be sure you have that transition. Just set a metronome, play some 2 at a time, and then 3 at a time, go back and forth. Measure 7, poco rubato, don't rush. These 16th notes, this is again very lyrical. The target note, the goal note in this measure is that E natural on the third beat, the top space of the staff. So that E is where you're going to go. And in the next bar, watch out for the triplet versus duplet rhythmic transition. All right, the next movement of this, measure 10. Suddenly, you are in a different meter, you're in a different key, and the style is very different. By the way, an important point, look at bar 9. There is no pause, there's no fermata, there's no break in the line. That's a 2-beat rest, and you have to play. You have to count that accurately at the slow tempo, and then on the downbeat of 10, it's got to be right in time and at the new tempo. So be sure you count through that half note rest, half note, half rest measure 9. Don't think that, oh, that's a separate movement, I can just stop. No, because somebody else at that audition is going to do it right, and then you've got a check mark against you. Right, so watch the style. This is a little more energetic here. At 14, that B flat fingering, let me find 14. Yeah, on the end of the second beat and at the end of the third beat in bar 14. Both of those, I think that's a great opportunity to use the bis fingering. And the bis fingering for B flat is pretty much like playing B natural with one finger. You just add the second key right below it. If you haven't used that before, it's really handy sometimes, but do not commit to it all the time. A lot of the time, you're going to need the side B flat, 1, 2, and bottom side key. All right, the dynamic in this measure 25 and measure 34, that's the first bar of the A ending and the B ending. It's exactly the same. Play it really quietly. It's marked mezzo piano, so do that so that you can build a crescendo moving on. All right, the A ending ends with that mezzo piano, and that's kind of a surprise. La da 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 dum bum 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 bum. It's very nice and gentle. It's a neat little ending. The B ending doesn't do that. That's got a firm, solid ending. Notice what I wrote for measure 41. Now, measure 36 in the second ending, the B ending, that C sharp fingering, that would be a great chance to try this fingering for C sharp. If you play C sharp, if you play the E with thumb, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's your E fingering. To go to the C sharp, right below the break, simply open 1 and 2 on the top hand. That's it. Keep the thumb, keep 3, keep 4 and 5. Then after that C sharp, put the D and put those two back down and add your low D key. And now you're back to there. And here's what that sounds like. Where is that? Actually, that C sharp has a little better blend with the E and the D because it's sort of like that note is now part of the upper register instead of a brighter sounding note at the top of the bottom register. That will not work, by the way, if you are playing a Selmer C star. Note the little note down here. Selmer has redesigned the mechanisms up here. They added a tone hole that totally throws off that fingering. So if you got a series 3, don't play it. But if you got one of the other Selmer horns, or any other instrument really, that fingering should work quite well. Check it with the tuner. All right, let's look at the 11-12 piece. First, we'll give that a listen. This is the Bach Sonata, unaccompanied flute. And let me figure out stop share and share the other video. Wow, here we go. Cool. So, hope you're following along on that, but hopefully you can go back and listen again if you need to. There are also some really, really great recordings of that piece by professional flautists. So check out Jean-Pierre Rampal, James Galway, two of the better-known flute players of the 20th century. But there's countless recordings of that on flute, and I thought it'd be nice to have a recording on the saxophone as well. So back to my notes, my list. Here are some comments on that first movement, the Poco Adagio. And I'm going to move real quickly on this because I'm getting close to an hour time frame. First of all, in the Baroque time period, the Baroque period in music that this was written in, the staccatos were not very short. They were not crisp. They were not that tight. In fact, it's because the violin bow hair, the horsetail hairs used in violin bows, they couldn't put enough tension in the wood. Bending the wood, they couldn't get the tension to really be tight in those horsehair, the bow hair. So when they tried to play staccato, the string would bend over the hair would bend over the string just a little bit, kind of give a soggier sound to it. It was a beautiful sound, but it didn't have that crispness. So all the other instrumentalists then would have to match the articulation style of the violin or the string players. So in this time period, 1750, 60, somewhere in there, this is a more relaxed staccato style. Watch out for that. Speaking of relaxed, the grace notes, measure 2, and later on, measure 4. Again, like in the other piece we looked at, not hurried, just a relaxed style. The gruppetto in measure 5. Now this is tricky for a lot of people. What you're going to do, that the gruppetto I'm talking about, that's that turn right up here on the top line. The notes, I've put them on the line here, B, C, B, A, B. And you're going to space those 5 notes evenly over the first eighth note of the measure. La da 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 dum, dee da 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 bum, like that. In fact, I'll play that once now. From starting with the B on the second beat of the measure, going up to the high F. I'm going to have to strap in for this one. And I strongly advise the side C for that C, rather than trying to flip your finger over and back. You should do that. Measure 8, the trill begins on D, even though it's not written that way. That's a characteristic of this Baroque period in the 1700s. The trills generally start on the upper note. So play the D and then drop into the C, hold the C, and tap that E flat side key. Measure 20, this is also in the Poco Adagio. Somebody spelled gruppetto wrong. I don't know why I did that. This one's different. This one, you've got 2 16th notes, and the turn is on the first of those 2, but it's going to go too fast if you try to do 64th notes in that 1/16. So you're going to have to make the next 16th a part of the gruppetto. So that one, let's see, where is that? Let's say measure 20. Ah, there it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. It sounds easy if you get it right. At 29 and 36, those two trills are a little different. They both start in the upper note, but the one with the dot, you make the dot its own note, and the one without the dot, you trill directly into the bar line to the final note. All right, so there's just a little difference there. The faster movement, the allegro, As I said before, staccatos in this time period were not crisp. They were not short. So just a little more, almost legato, but they have to be detached. So use that side C at measure 2. As you go la-da-dum from A, B, C, just add that second side key to your high B. Much easier than trying to flip. Cleaner sound. Measure 12, trill on the D using the E flat palm key. Yeah, that's going to be fast. You might get 2 turns with that E flat palm key, maybe just 1, and that'll be enough. But keep it graceful, keep it light. Don't let it get heavy. At 13, start to bring out the style of this. 15 and 16, a crescendo and a decrescendo would really make that beautiful. That would, your goal note would be the high A, and then bring the crescendo down. Now, in the next line like that, 15 and 16, or no, let's look at the next screen. At 19 and 20, now this time it's a similar pattern, but we're not going to decrescendo because we need to be forte at the downbeat of 21. So now you're going to have a 2-bar crescendo pushing to that. And then at 21, the second beat is piano or mezzo. Yeah, piano. And then that sets up a little echo in the next 2 bars. So crescendo to 21, and then follow the written dynamics there. 28, trill style is very much the same as back at measure 12. Okay, looking at 36, this is hard stuff. This is going to get very technical now from here to the end. Work it out slowly and lightly. Don't slam your fingers, and don't hit the tongue with any energy into the heavy energy into the reed. Keep everything as light as possible. Play it slowly and perfectly over and over, and gradually bring it up, and keep that sense of lightness in your fingers and your tongue as you go through this. That's going to make this sound great. What else? What else in there? Bar 48 to 50. This is by far the hardest part in the piece, these large intervals. And what you need to do is look at the bottom line of notes starting at 48. And focus your airstream and your tone concept on those lower notes, and then allow the E naturals on the top space of the staff. Allow the instrument to play those notes without you changing anything. Try to do it that way. You should, if you're biting up, it's going to be really hard to come back down. You're going to end up moving your jaw. You don't want jaw movement in this. You just want to focus on the low notes and let the upper notes, let the instrument play the upper notes for you. It's not easy, but it's really worth it if you can focus on that. All right. Don't let that last low note honk. Very, very common with saxophone players. So I think that's about it. Again, I'm Dr. Scott Callisted, Hayes School of Music at App State. If you have any questions about this, about anything I've said in here, send me a note. Love to hear from you. Love to talk to you a little bit. All right, that's it.